if you can get someone to chuckle or smile or laugh, it's a connection like this right off the bat. But not all humor is equal. There's good jokes and bad jokes, and not every joke can evoke a laugh. And also, we have different sort of tastes. Like your taste in humor may be different than mine.
Hey, everybody, Thursday again. Yes, it is time for another Titan's Tale, a tale of Titans telling, where we inspire empires, telling everybody of successes and failures and what we learned from that. And today I've got a Titan all the way from Toronto, Canada, Andy Semotiuk. Andy is an immigration lawyer, and we all know about that right now. But we're not going to discuss much about that. We won't get down the political rabbit holes that we tend to sometimes. But today we're going to talk about ways that people have succeeded through dedication and other ways. So please help me welcome Andy. Andy, how are you doing?
Fantastic. And I'm just delighted to be on your program, Chris. Thanks for having me. I'm very excited about being here.
We appreciate that. Well, Andy, can you tell us a little about yourself? I mean, I know I mentioned you're a lawyer and stuff, but give us a little background and then we'll get started on our conversation.
Sure. Well, I was born in Canada and raised half the time in Canada, half in the United States. My mother and my aunt, her sister, shared responsibilities for raising me. So, for example, I went to high school in the United States in Los Angeles, but I grew up in Edmonton, Alberta. And I studied law, became a lawyer. I studied in Vancouver, Canada, UBC, ultimately wrote the bar exams in New York and California and Toronto, Ontario, and BC. And I've practiced in Los Angeles for 10 years, in New York for 5 years. Just before COVID hit, my wife said to me, okay, Andy, we've been in the United States a long time. You had family and so on. They've passed on. But I have 2 sisters up here in Toronto, and it's time for us to move up to Toronto. And so we packed all our stuff and moved up just before COVID hit.
Wow.
Somehow just missed COVID, thankfully, and had my practice all settled in Toronto, and I've been here since then.
Sure. I have a few questions in. I guess the first one I have, do you have dual citizenship? Are you Canadian only, or how's that?
I'm a Canadian. I've had a green card, but I just work with work permits and stuff like that in the U.S. now.
Sure. And then I know you're an immigration lawyer now. Have you always been an immigration lawyer, or has it been law in general, and then you kind of specialized?
Oh, well, when I started, anybody who walked in the door and whatever problem they had, that's what I was a specialist
You were
in.
solving those problems. I hear you.
But over time, I realized, hey, well, wait a minute, there's a lot of law to know here. I'm not sure I'm going to know all this stuff. So I better kind of focus. And actually, a friend of mine who's a nuclear physicist gave me a kind of a guideline for what to do. I was talking to him. His name is Yuri. He's a professor at York University, or he was back then. I says to him, Yuri, how can you, I mean, nuclear physics, that's like really complicated. How can you know all that? And he says, I focus on a small area, and I've become an expert in this small area of nuclear physics. So much so that people come to me and want to know what my thoughts are in this area. And he said that's the way to go. So that's what I started to do. I focused on immigration. But then pretty soon, like when I went to law school,
Yeah.
We were terrified of income tax. It was so complicated. You had to be so smart. We're just terrified of it. Little did I know that immigration would turn out to be just as complicated and just as bad as income tax. And so I had to narrow my focus again. And over my whole life, I've been narrowing my focus now. Now it's more or less business immigration. That's the area that I'm involved in mainly.
I understand. So how did you discover your purpose? What caused you to think I need to be a lawyer versus a doctor or just a business owner or whatever? What pushed you that direction?
Well, that's a good question. Purpose is, they say that there are 2 key questions in life. One is, who am I? It's philosophy, right?
Right.
The second is, why am I here? Those are two great questions we all have to kind of dwell on and figure out for ourselves. Nobody can help you with those questions. You have to answer them yourself.
Oh, you're right there.
Yeah. So I asked myself, why am I here? Well, first of all, who am I? And okay, I was born in Canada. My folks came from Ukraine. Everybody comes from somewhere, you know, like Italy, Spain, Sweden, or wherever. My folks came from Ukraine. So I have this immigrant kind of experience behind, not that I was an immigrant, but my folks were immigrants.
Mm-hmm.
So that's my tie into immigration and kind of led me into that area.
Okay.
And then I got into the area of communication, effective communication in two ways. One was speaking. I joined Toastmasters, and for many years, in fact, 35 years, I attended regular every week club meetings of Toastmasters, which is an organization that teaches public speaking and leadership. And over 35 years, I rose to the top of that group. And you'll see over my shoulder over here, there's a plaque on the wall.
I see that.
That's I'm a distinguished Toastmaster, they call it, which is the highest level in the Toastmasters organization. There are 330,000 Toastmasters worldwide in 16,000 clubs, including one in your city there, Chris, and in my city and everywhere else. And I worked with it, and I got to the very top. And that was speaking, presentation skills. But the world was signaling me, this is not where we want you to be. We want you to be somewhere else. And somewhere else was in the area of writing, which was a big surprise to me. Because when I went to university, first year university, I had to take a course called English 101. And I struggled. I barely made it. I got 50% on the last day of the course. And I only made it because the professor took pity on me. He knew I had to pass English. Otherwise, I couldn't continue in university. And today, if he knew, like now I write for Forbes on immigration. I've been writing for Forbes for 10 years. I'm a former UN correspondent. I've written 4 books. I've published 5 books. If he knew that I got anywhere writing, he'd turn over in his grave, like, shocking. But the world has told me, look, pal, this is where we want you, and I got a little bit better. And over time I got, I guess, pretty good.
Well, I know we're going to talk about your books here in a little while. And I see my notes. You do obviously contribute to Forbes. Was that an opportunity that just fell in your lap, or did you pursue it, or what?
Well, here's what happened. From a lousy writer, terrible writer, English. I had to write letters and things in law, like to clients, and then briefs and things like this. So I started writing, and then I wrote some articles and stuff that got published in low-level newspapers and things like that. And then I had a big break when in 1975, which is a long time ago, but nonetheless, in 1975, I got an opportunity to write some articles for a group called Southern News Services in Canada, which was a major newspaper chain throughout Canada. And I was allowed to submit basically freelance for them. But it opened the door for me to become a UN correspondent. And every week at the UN, I'd go to, every day at noon, they have this press conference there. And all these leaders come through there, everybody you can imagine from all over the world, and they hold news conferences to talk about whatever they're interested in. And I was able to sit in on those, and I had the opportunity to ask questions of some, prominent people. Back then it was like Jimmy Carter, President Ford, Kissinger, and all these type of people. And then I went back into law, and I was practicing law, and I had a website, and it said my website, myworkvisa.com, I had my biography on there. And it said I was a former UN correspondent. Now, I don't know about you, but me in my life, I, no matter what I applied for, whatever I did, it was always, no, you're too fat, you're too skinny, you're too tall, you're too stupid, you're too smart. You should have applied last week. It's too late, it's too early, etc. Nobody ever, said, hey, we need you. You're the guy I need, except once.
Yeah.
And it was Forbes looked at some stuff I was writing on immigration. And someone over there said, who's this clown that's writing on immigration? We got to talk to this guy. Let's find out. And they emailed me and they said, hey, you want to write some articles for Forbes? Would I? Yes, I would. And 10 years later, here I am.
That's a great story.
Yeah.
I want to go back to your parents real quick. They're both from Ukraine, right?
Yeah.
They instill any particular mindset as being from Ukraine, fresh to Canada, and then they had you. And do you have any siblings?
No.
Okay, so they had you. And did they instill any work habits or mentality
Yes.
different than, say, what you were used to, or what I guess other people would be accustomed to?
Yeah. I'll illustrate it with one story.
Okay.
When I went to university and then law school, I lived with my mother. And I used to come home late at night, and she had an apartment house that she leased out to pay. My father died when I was 9 years old, so pretty much I was raised by my mother. And she ran an apartment house and rented out rooms in order to make the money to live. I'd come home at night, and she'd be in one of the apartments washing the floors on her hands and knees. She put me through law school on her hands and knees washing floors. And I have great respect for that. Like, I have great respect for people who work in low menial jobs to help their families. We can't all be president of the United States, and we can't all maybe work exactly where we want, or, it's not one of these things where, I wandered around just like I didn't know what to do. I just, found whatever it was, and I ended up president of General Motors.
Right.
Well, it's not the way it works. Yeah, you got to work hard, and there's always someone behind you. Like, success is never a one-man show. There's always someone back there. I'll bet you any money there's people in your life, Chris, that have helped you to get where you are.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And sometimes we forget about those people. Say, I'm the one, well, no, you're not.
Well, I like to tell a story about, my parents were very influential on me. So was my grandmother and my grandfather. But my grandfather, he did a lot of odd jobs. That's what he did. He farmed. He did eggs and milk. And my grandma would, we prepare the eggs and milk and we'd sell it in town before I actually dropped some stuff off before they took me to school. And but one of the things he was known for, he used to hand dig graves before backhoes and excavators.
Yeah.
And that is a lot of hard work. You think about it. 6 foot by 6 foot, and I think it was 4 foot wide, and dug them by hand. Yeah.
Wow.
Yeah. And they call him in advance, and he'd go out and they'd dig them. And
getting blisters probably there. Huh?
No kidding. Yeah. But that was hard work, and but he wasn't afraid of it.
Yeah.
And my dad's a workaholic. All people say I'm a workaholic, and I probably get that from my grandfather. Well, my grandmother too, but that was some hard physical labor. Anyway, you have a story about your aunt. Is that right? Or great aunt?
Yeah.
Did you know her personally?
No.
Or you just know the story? I didn't know she had passed away. Or...
But I would like to share it with you. I think it's a good story.
Well, let's hear it.
Okay. So her name was Solomia. Her last name was Krushelnitska. It's not a name you would commonly hear or know about.
Now, was she Ukrainian?
Yes, she was.
Okay. Mm-hmm.
Now, she rose to the top of the opera world. She wanted to be a singer. This was her calling. This is what she loved. And she rose to the top of the opera world in the golden age of opera, which was the first decade of the 1900s. And she performed along with luminaries in the opera world, people like Puccini. There was a guy named Toscanini. There was an opera star named Caruso, who probably, if you're not an opera, you may not know these names. Caruso was before Pavarotti. Pavarotti came along. Some people know Pavarotti.
I've heard of him.
A tenor.
Yeah.
Well, Caruso was before Pavarotti. These guys were all in Italy, and she rose to stardom in Italy. The story I want to tell is that one day Puccini, who was one of the great composers of opera, not everybody's into opera, so I'm not telling this story because it's opera. I'm just telling you this story because it has something worthwhile to know about for all of us. But one day he's finished, performing some of the great operas that he's performed. He's looking for a new opera to perform, and he can't find anything. So he decides to go to London and visit in London. Maybe he could find something. This is in early 1900s. And while he's there, there's a play that's put on, and it's called Madame Butterfly, and it's about a geisha girl from Japan in the 1800s, who, when Japan is being opened up by the American Navy, falls in love with an officer named Pinkerton, an American officer naval officer named Pinkerton in Japan, in Nagasaki. And they go, they have a romantic relationship, and then actually they even go through a form of marriage in Japan. And then Pinkerton announces, hey, America's calling me back. I have to go back home, but I'll come back to see you again. Chiyo-Chiyo-san, that was her name. That was Butterfly in Japanese, Chiyo-Chiyo-san, this geisha girl. And the girl says, okay, well, I'll wait for you. And he leaves, and he doesn't know, but she's pregnant with his son. And she gives birth to his son while she's waiting, And the son grows older, a year, 2 years, 3, 5 years. And finally, this Pinkerton shows back up in Japan. But he has in tow with him an American wife. And the two parents of the boy have a crisis. The crisis is, what do we do with this boy? Does he stay with the geisha girl in Japan? Is that a good future for him? Or should he go to America and live with his American father and the father's new wife? And they decide, yeah, he should go to America. So in one of the final scenes of the opera, and the play actually, but in the opera, Chiyo-Chiyo's son pulls the little boy off to the side to say goodbye. And this is what she says to him. She says, look at this face. It is the face of your mother. Remember it. You'll never see it again. And the boy is then taken off by the father to go to America. And she, in her despondency, commits suicide. And that's how the story ends. So when Puccini saw this story, he fell in love with it immediately. And he just had to get the permission to perform this as an opera. And he got it from the person who owned the rights. And he composed an opera, beautiful opera, called Madame Butterfly, with that storyline. And he was so confident of the success of this opera that he invited his family members to attend the premiere at La Scala, which is the greatest opera theater back then in the world, in Milan, in Italy. And to play the leading roles, he asked this lady named Rosina Storchio, not my aunt, but Rosina Storchio, and this guy named Zanatello to play the lead roles. And they were some of the leading people of that era in opera. And they staged the opera in 1904 at La Scala. But that evening, everybody was nervous behind the stage before they went on. Something just didn't feel right. Things were just not going the way they should. And when they indeed performed the opera, instead of ovations and stuff, they got whistles and boos and hecklers, and guys shouted out "La Bohème," which is another opera, meaning you guys are performing not this one but La Bohème. We know that one already, and things like that. And when the opera closed, it was such a disaster that the next day all the headlines in the newspaper said, Puccini lays an egg. It's terrible, disaster, operas, to the point where Puccini thought, oh my gosh, I'm closing this thing down. He closed down the run after one performance. And he was in shock. He didn't know what the heck to do. But he had this friend, Arturo Toscanini, who was at that time one of the great directors of symphonies in the world. And he went to see Toscanini and he said, Arturo, I don't know what to do. This is my baby. I love this opera. I've got to get it. What do I do? And Toscanini said to him, okay, if you want to get that opera, you go see Solomia Krushelnicka, who was, as I mentioned already, at the height of her fame in the opera world. And he said, okay, I'll do it. And he went over to her and he talked to her, trying to convince her to play the lead role that had just collapsed.
Yeah.
This is like asking Julia Roberts to take on a lead role in a film that was just bombed by Sandra Bullock.
Sure.
Wow, that was quite a question. But because of her friendships with these two people, she said, okay, I'll do it. Now, her challenge was, she was in her 30s, and she was going to play Chio Chio-san, who was a teenager. And, this opera had to be reworked. And the two of them spent months together working on this opera to rework it, to rewrite it. She wore a Japanese kimono for several months just to get herself into the role as the lead role in the opera. And in 1904, in a Teatro Grande, which is in Brescia, about 60 miles from Milan, they restaged the opera. Now, everybody was nervous again. Everybody, like the cast was nervous. Puccini was chain smoking on the side of the theater, in the wing of the theater. Everybody, even the audience, was nervous, and they're thinking, "Is this going to be pulled off or not?"
Was it in the same opera house or a different opera house?
Different, 60 miles away in a different opera house. But they did it. And the way it worked was Solomia came on, and she had an enchanting voice. The voice was something special for her. And she was gifted as an actress, not only a singer, but as an actress, and she was beautiful. And she won over the audience. And as they played, the opera forward, they started stopping them. And back then, they didn't have instant replay or anything like that. So what they do is they demand a re-performance of the aria that everybody just sang. So instead of going forward, they'd re-sing the damn aria again, then keep going. And they sang the whole opera to the point where at the end, they got 7 standing ovations. And then that opera traveled all over Europe and all over the world. Solomia performed that opera 100 times. And at the end of the 100th performance, she went to Puccini and said, okay, that's it. I'm not going to perform that opera ever again. Puccini, performed it all over the world, but never performed it at La Scala as a kind of a dig for suffering through that catastrophe at the opera. Now, what's the deal here? What made her such a, how could she pull it off when everybody else couldn't? Because they worked together. I said earlier, and I believe it, nobody's a success by themselves. There's always someone else behind you. Success is a team sport. It's not an individual sport. So that was one thing. But she was a athlete. This lady, she knew 8 languages. She knew the operas, all the scores and all the, the whole thing of every opera. There were 60 operas she knew off by heart. 60 operas. She traveled all over the United States. Well, she traveled all over Europe, all over North and South America, all over North Africa in the course of her life. She was in New York in 1928. She came and sang in New York, and in Philadelphia and in Chicago and a few other cities in the United States. And she performed in Montreal and Winnipeg in Canada in 1928. That's the year that the Chrysler Building was built, if you know the Chrysler Building in New York. They had a competition. Would the Chrysler Building come first or the Empire State Building? And the Chrysler won because the Empire State Building was built like 7 years later. They finished it, 35, I think.
And it was taller too.
Yeah. But anyway, that's the story about Madame Butterfly. And it's one of the most loved opera, even to this day. It's one of the 5 top operas of the world.
So you're an author, and that's a form of an entrepreneurship in itself, because you got to be, you go out by yourself, you write a book, you get it published, and so forth.
Yeah.
And you've got, well, I know of 4. You said there's 5 actually?
Well, yeah, I published one with my son. My son wrote a book.
Oh, okay.
401 Goofy Jokes for Kids. All the books are on Amazon if you want to get a book.
What I did notice, you've got, at least I see 2 about humor.
Yeah.
Is that easy to write, humor?
That's a great question, Chris. I'll tell you something about that. Humor is one of the greatest communication weapons human beings have. It's instant rapport. If you can get someone to chuckle or smile or laugh, it's like it's a connection like this right off the bat. If you can. So, but not all humor is equal. There's good jokes and bad jokes, and not every joke can evoke a laugh. And also, we have different tastes. Like your taste in humor may be different than mine. But here's the way I love. This is my favorite kind of humor. I take you on a trip. So that if I can portray it, it's like going on a half circle, around the half circle to the top, from the bottom to the top. And when you get to the top of the half circle, you realize that in the punchline, that there's a straight line between the beginning and the end, and you didn't have to go around in a circle. So it's kind of a pleasant deception that you realize. And I'll give you an illustration.
Okay.
This is a little off color, but I hope nobody will be offended by it. It's actual true story. One day I was in the washroom, and I was in a stall, sitting in a stall, and there was a guy next to me in the stall next door. And he says to me, "Hey," and I'm thinking, "Yeah."
You talking to me?
And the guy says, "You going to be long?" I said, "No." "You need some help?" "No." Then he says, "Hang on, Joe. There's some wacko in the next stall over there that's beginning a conversation with me." Right? That's it. That's the kind of humor that I like. That what's the word? It's kind of a deception in a sense. It's sort of you're leading the guy up the trail, and then you find out, oh well, it's not as complicated as I thought it was. Anyway, but I'll tell you something. Writing a joke will never make it as funny as actually telling a joke, I think, because the written word is different than the spoken word.
With the inflections and the timing and so forth.
The spoken word is the closest you'll ever get to emotion and to kind of a spiritual connection with whoever you're talking to. Like we have that right now, in a sense, you and I, Chris, when we're talking. We're kind of in we're soulmates if we're doing well, not if we're arguing with each other, but if we're sort of talking like we are here, it's almost you're reaching a kind of a soul kind of level or spiritual kind of level. At least if if it's touching you emotionally, I think is one of the big ways of knowing that you're really getting close to someone else, either through laughter or crying or I don't know what, the joyful singing or whatever it is. But those are some insights in that area.
Well, this go in a little bit different direction, but most people listen to the podcast through just audio only, and we've recently started a YouTube channel so that you and I will be recorded as we are. Do you think video makes a bigger difference in your communication? You're talking about telling jokes and so forth, and one-on-one here. Would we have a different? Do you think we'd have a different
Connection.
rapport? Yeah.
Yeah.
Without the video, I was doing on the phone.
Yeah, help me with this because I'm not sure I know the answer. I think visual connection is important. They say that there are three kinds of sort of communication skills. One is visual, the other is kinesthetic, and the other is auditory. So visual is if you I think in learning they say you can learn using one of those three methods, but the order in which you use the method, because we're all visual, we're all kinesthetic, meaning hands-on, like touchy, feely, and we're all auditory, we listen. But it's the order in which those are important to you that determines the kind of best communication to use with the person you're dealing with. So in my case, I've noticed that over time, like I've been auditory, because I've in Toastmasters, it's all about talking, and presenting. But over time, my visual skill has been rising. So now it's almost equal. If I'm reading or listening, it's to me almost the same in terms of how absorbing I can, how I can absorb whatever's coming in the way of some kind of a message. And so if your audience is visual, like for those people who are visual, having a YouTube channel like this is extremely important because that's the main way that they're going to relate to what your message is. But for those people who are auditory, meaning listening, the YouTube channel won't be as important, but it still will be a way of contributing to the impact of the message. If you just think about this for a second, like in terms of written communication, you put down some signals on a piece of paper, your eye reads the signals and converts them into meaning into your mind. And if the signal, the passage is something worthwhile, something significant, it will move you or the reader. Those little signals on a piece of paper actually move someone else. And right now, you and I, as we communicate, I'm just allowing air out through my, through my vocal cords, and they're vibrating and making a sound, and it's going over the internet to your ears. And then your eardrum is picking that up, and it's being translated into some sort of meaning. Like those are miracles, if you think about it. Right?
It is. This is for all the people creating teams out there. When we train somebody, I was taught, and I do practice. There's three ways of learning, and then we just talked about the visual, the doing, and the auditorial. Not auditorial, but in writing. So what we would do is you would have a person, the trainer would go show a person how to do it. They would then allow that person to demonstrate doing it themselves. And then we also had a procedure procedure basically. So you could, some people could read it and understand it better but they had all three ways.
Oh yeah.
Because we didn't know actually how that person dealt with it better. But and then we made a manual that had those in there, so you could always refer back to them. But we also had somebody who was in charge of training new people in different departments and so forth. That's how we trained.
Yeah, makes sense.
You wrote a book, The Young Professional,
Right.
and I have a note here because Young Professional is about basically, let me read the subtitle here, a real world survival guide for the new college graduate.
Right.
And my question is, well, when did you buy that? When did you write that first?
Oh, that's probably about 10 years ago.
Okay. What's your thoughts on college today? Or what about going from basically being a high school diploma and going out and becoming either a apprentice or just starting your own business or so forth versus going to college?
If your life is all about money and you see money as the key thing that's going to make you happy and so on, then university and college and high school and all that are just, preparations for getting onto the stage where you can make the money to make your life happy. But if you yearn for some sort of better understanding of yourself and your life and what your purpose is here and so on, a good place to find out more is in school, at a university or college or technical school or whatever. So a lot depends on what your motivations are.
Mm-hmm.
But if you measure the world in terms of, well, how much money do you have compared to how much money I make? College may not be the best place for you. Not everybody who goes to college makes a lot of money. You'd be surprised at the earnings of lawyers, for example. Not all lawyers are out there making $500,000 a year. Most lawyers don't make $500,000 a year. Same with doctors. Doctors, seems to me like all doctors make $500,000 a year. But, a lot of these high-powered professionals aren't making that much money. And the world is kind of upside down because there are all these teenagers who have developed all these computer programs and been out there on the internet, and they've made fortunes. They're like millionaires. And if, I got people coming through, that's what they want. Don't talk to me about the purpose of life or my purpose or whatever. Just tell me, give me what I need to know so I can make the money, so I can get out there and make the money, and I'll do the rest.
Well, I'm not for or against college.
Right.
I am against student debt.
Oh, so am I.
When there's no chance of getting reimbursed for that in the career you're attaining.
Yeah, 100%.
That's my real problem there. Yeah. I mean, I know professionals. I want my doctor to go to college. I want my lawyer to understand the law.
Yeah.
But there's some professions that they go out and they get the college debt, and then they get themselves tied up into something that they've never really expected. And I think sometimes we as society or we as a government or whoever, we push that. And colleges are just a business, and their job is to make money. So they market and do their thing. And I understand that, but I just wish somehow we would teach our young people the appropriate, whether it be about money or career or whatever. This is the best path for you based on what you're telling me you want or what your desires are.
Yeah.
I don't think we do that.
You're right. I'm 100% with you on that. And I'm not sure how we could set things up. Like, I don't like the fact that there are students out there that are making, like, they got huge debts and sometimes have studied things that are just totally impractical and of no use.
Yeah.
And I don't get it.
Well, I said no use. There's no financial way to pay off the debt that you just learned.
Yeah.
You can learn something. I mean, if you're interested in something, that's great. Go learn it.
Yeah.
Study it, do whatever. But don't go into debt over it and expect that whatever you just learned to pay for it. And that's certain, I'm sure there's certain categories, but not always is it going to generate funds to pay for that. You're going to have to get some other job to pay for it.
So. Yeah. That's a challenge, and you have to be on your toes. Like, it's a lesson that parents should teach their kids, I think, like, do you remember, like, old us. I'm going to count you a little bit on the older category. There was a time when getting into debt was a no-no. You don't go into debt.
That's right.
Yeah.
Well, let me. You mentioned 1975 earlier.
Yeah.
I was 5 years old.
Oh.
Just so we're all clear.
Well,
No, there wasn't. I mean, you're right. There is no.
grandparents, I'll bet you any money, they didn't want to go into debt.
No,
Yeah.
absolutely not.
Yeah.
We were all about saving money and stuff like that.
Yeah.
And I read a book about Rich Dad Poor Dad by Robert Kiyosaki.
I know.
He's done some books with Trump, and I'm not even getting into the political part, but he has other books like that. And there's the philosophy that I have now is there's good debt and bad debt.
Yes.
So I want to stay away from the bad debt, and as long as the numbers make sense, good debt's a good thing.
It can be.
Yeah, it can be. So we're about running out of time. So before I go, I want to, if you're on YouTube or those who are just listening, I have a felt painting of John Wayne in the background.
Yeah.
And before we got started, Andy and I were discussing John Wayne and so forth, and he mentioned that he had a story about Roy Rogers. I said, well, Andy, before we go, I want to hear the story about Roy Rogers. So, Andy, can you elaborate on that?
Yeah. Okay. I was a little kid, probably about maybe 7 years old in Los Angeles. I was visiting my aunt and uncle back then. And we were at the Coliseum, which holds 100,000 people downtown Los Angeles, at a show, some kind of a big show. And a surprise guest was announced, and the surprise guest was Roy Rogers. And I remember to this day, for those who don't know who Roy Rogers is, he was a singing cowboy. He always wore a white hat. He had a kind of light blue costume. He had a horse called Trigger, and his wife was Dale Evans.
Was Trigger with him?
Yes, he was.
Oh, good.
And they had a song they used to sing. This is the song how they ended every TV show that they were on. And it was, happy trails to you until we meet again. Happy trails to you. Keep smiling until then. So anyway, they announced Roy Rogers is here and he's coming into the stadium. And Roy got on that Trigger and he rode, high speed right into the center of the auditorium in the stadium. And then the horse got up on its hind feet, and took off his hat and waved to the audience while the horse is standing on 2 feet. What an incredible experience for a young kid, 7 years old. I can't tell you how thrilled I was. Like to this day, I remember that event, and I think what it is there are people you admire. I don't know why, well, in his case, because he was a good guy. And to get a nod, even just a wave of a hat from someone that you admire can mean so much to you, especially if you're a kid.
From a business standpoint, imagine the branding that they put in with Roy and Dale and even Trigger,
Yeah.
That was part of because you can go to the Roy Rogers Museum and see Trigger, I guess stuffed is a better, the real Trigger's right there.
Yeah.
And people still go see it. And when I was a kid, I used to watch it on cable TV. I didn't have cable TV where I went, but when I went to visit my grandmother in town, she had cable. So I got to watch Roy Rogers, which I thought was great. But those type of people and just marketing and stuff, branding of just the branding of him and Dale. But in his movies still, he was always the hero, he had the white hat.
Yeah. And on all the cereal boxes, they were on there, as kids were buying cereals, Cheerios and all that kind of stuff. They're all on the box there. You see that, you want to buy it.
If Happy Meals were available back then, you'd have a Roy Rogers Happy Meal, I'm sure.
That's right.
All right. Well, Andy, thank you for your time today.
My pleasure.
If somebody wanted to reach out to you, or I guess we already know, find your books on Amazon. Is that right?
Yeah, they're all on Amazon.
And you'd also find Andy's books at the bottom of the show notes here. Links to that. And as always, you can always go to titanstale.com and the guest list and find Andy's information and so forth. Andy, you have any parting words before we go? Happy
Vaya,
trails.
vaya con Dios. Go with God is a good parting word.
Well, my grandmother used to say, God be with you till we meet again. So, all right. Thank you very much.
Thank you.